So it is 12 o'clock. I welcome everybody to the CPP study break. Um, as I have been saying in the last couple of meetings, we're trying to get you guys to know our liaisons a little better. So we're letting them kind of take the reins a little bit in answering questions. And I'll introduce Sarah here in a minute. I will be your host. I'll be monitoring the chat, and you will be able to post your questions either in the chat, or if you have a second to break in, you can ask your questions live on video. Um, didn't we agree that non-host liaisons should turn off video?
No, we agreed to that during the Sherman image reviews that
Right. Yeah.
people
Yeah.
who were not part of the review
Yeah.
would turn
Yeah.
off their.
So, Guy, no, we didn't. You can turn on your video. Um, Chuck will be monitoring our discussions, and as we come up with any questions that he may have a resource for, so he may be able to find us a page or a place that we can go link to. He'll be putting that in the chat. And then today, I'd like to introduce Sarah Crail. Sarah is from the Indianapolis area. She's been a working pro since 2011, and she does mainly weddings and portraits. She's been a CPP since 2016, and she just joined on to be with us, be a liaison with us this year. She is a part of her local affiliate and felt it was a good thing to be a liaison to attract more CPPs in that area. Um, and I asked Sarah what has been the biggest benefit of being a CPP for her, and she said being able to think on the fly in her shoots. So being able to just automatically have the answer right at her fingertips and know and be confident in that as she goes along and works. So I'll turn it over to you, Sarah. Thank you for hosting with us today or working with us today. And I'm going to
Thank
turn my
you.
video on.
Alrighty. Thank you, Chris. I
Yep.
want to give a shout out to Manuela. We were chatting last night. She's here in the well, not Indy, I think Indiana area, and was curious about this. So she jumped in today, but I think she's pretty new. So I want to just give a quick flyby as to what the CPP is for her benefit, and probably some other folks, or maybe some other folks who are in different steps or stages in the process. So CPP is the designation earned through Professional Photographers of America. The process involves declaring candidacy under PPA, and there's a $200 fee that goes with that initial declaration. Then you go through a process to study for the CPP exam, which is a written exam. Help me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking it's 100 questions. Is that correct, everybody?
Yep.
It's been about 5 years since I took it. So a 100-question quiz or test, quiz, little quiz. Once you pass the exam, then you submit a series of images for review. And once the images are accepted and approved, then you officially earn your CPP designation. So this call is primarily for people who want to ask questions about the exam and get some help with content before they take the exam. Just kind of what's on it, what's covered, and things like that. And then some of the fellows, or okay, guys and gals, I think there's more guys who are liaisons, will help people kind of through the image portion of the process of making sure that the images that they shoot and then submit are going to hopefully pass. So several people are expert in that area, is helping guide people through that process. So that kind of as context for Manuel and anybody else who may be new or new-ish on the call. So what I think, as Chris said, I'm kind of new to this group myself. So I believe the format has been kind of some open-ended questions, and then if there's not a lot of specific questions to dive into, then I'll pull something from a practice test and we'll go through and discuss that. So off the bat, let me see if there's anybody who's got a burning question right away that may need help with something that's been on their mind. So anybody on the call right now who's definitely got something that they can't wait to ask, or they're thinking about something, go ahead and unmute and ask. Enter the Jeopardy music. Do, 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 do.
I have a question. It's more about learning than it is specific CPP question. So let's say you're using natural light as a fill light. Do you measure the natural light first and then adjust your light, your main light and your ISO?
That's a great question. So is this in context of what may be asked on the CPP, or is this more kind of a general on the fly?
It's a general question, but I mean, it could be asked, you know, because it's all about fill light and, you know, your main light and exposures and that sort of stuff.
So I'll answer like how I would do it myself, which I'm sure will be different than what some of the other folks would say, because there's a couple schools of thought.
Right.
And this is going to sound really like bad being a CPP, but there's there's kind of the that looks about right school of thought, and then there's the mathematical school of thought, which is more along the lines of what we learn at CPP, which is not what my area, like I struggle with the numbers. I'm a much more, that looks about right, I like it, but it may not be perfect for competition. So with that as context, here's the artistic, that looks about right kind of view, and then I'll let somebody who's more mathematical answer it in that direction. So what I have learned and what I have found that works for me, if I'm shooting outdoors with available light and I'm adding flash, what I'll typically do is get an overall exposure that I'm happy with, and then go down underexpose a smidge and then add my flash. So I'll take the ambient, not a meter reading because I don't use my meters, shame on me, but I'll get something that I feel like it looks good, and then I'll take it down a notch and then add flash to it. So that's my method. That's not mathematical nor precise. Who would like to pick up a more maybe acceptable mathematical approach to that, or a CPP-like approach to that?
Sarah, if I can say something I've used for many years teaching my candidates, and they all remember it, and they all love it, is a saying I have. It says, expose for the place and light for the face. Okay? And that's the way you go about it. If you remember that, all you do is you go out and you take your exposure however you want it. Look at the background I got here. I could, if I wanted somebody in front of that, you know, I would expose for that background in the sky and that kind of thing. And then after all is said and done, then I'd throw light at the subject to light up their face in the way I want it. Expose for the place, light for the face.
Renee, I hope that's not more confusing or like unprecise. If you're a mathematical person, you're probably tearing your hair out with my answer.
Well, here's the thing is, I'm like you. I've never been the mathematical person, and I'm trying to be more like that mathematical person. I was actually taking pictures of my grandbaby, and we were indoors, so I had a strobe. So obviously that, you know, the shutter doesn't matter. But I was trying to think, because the ambient light you can't change. It is what it is, right? So really the only other two options to change are your exposure and your flash. Am I wrong?
You're right. I think I'm trying to think, is there anything else that could come into, I mean, obviously your location, where you are in relation to the light, if you're in sun or shade, you know, as far as where you move. I don't know if you're on the call last week, but there was a little bit of conversation around a black reflector to use for subtracting light or to add shadow on one side of the face. So those are, you know, those are some small things, but basically correct. Yeah, you're either your big things are going to be your exposure and adding flash.
Okay.
Is there anybody else who would like to weigh in on this?
I guess I would ask is, are you using the natural light as your main light, or are you using it as your fill light? Because that will determine what you're going to use your other lighting source for. So if you're going to use it as your main light, then I personally, I would exposure my ambient in the backdrop, and then I would use the fill flash to light up my subject to make sure they pop out from the.
That's what
keeping
I
it
was doing.
balanced between the two.
Yeah, that's what I was doing.
Now, if you're trying to get a ratio on the person, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, whatever you want, then, using the math, you would measure what the ambient light is, and then adjust your flash for either the appropriate number of stops above it or below it, depending on if that ambient light is really bright, that you could use that as your main.
Okay.
But that would be when the actual math would come into play on that is when you're trying to get a lighting ratio on the person. Then the actual math would come in. But if you're just trying to, like Skip was saying, you expose for that background, get that looking right, and then put whatever light you need on the person to get them right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. What other questions may be on your mind or rolling around in your head?
Hi, I had a question. This is Rick Ross. Question is on the color wheel and combining the primary colors to get a secondary color. I understand it for additive light, but I'm not real clear on subtractive light. One, do you use the same color wheel, and is it still the combination of, in that case, it would be the subtractive primary colors? Is it done the same way with the same color wheel? I guess is my question.
This is a great question, Rick. And I was telling Chris just a little bit ago, this is not my strong area, so I'm going to defer to one of the other CPPs. I was telling Chris last night, it was about 5 years ago that I actually took the test. And so last night I took a practice test just to see, okay, where's my weak areas? And those were the questions I missed, were on the very questions you're asking. So I'm going to defer your question to one of our other CPPs who may be stronger in this area. Who would like to take that?
I nominate Ron because Ron explains it really well.
I can throw up a picture of the additive and subtractive color wheels if you'd like.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. And I did get it correct on the practice test, but I'm not sure I got it correct for the right reasons.
Now I can't see anybody.
And
we can see your screen.
Guy is throwing up some information here in Steve Kozak's guide that you can reference to, both from the previous question and then also for this question. He's saying reference page 130 for color wheel and 106 for flash balancing. So,
and
hey
now
Ron,
that
are you out there? I can't see if you're there or not.
Now that I have my mic finally working, I'm using Steve's as a good reference because I would strongly recommend those of you who are not comfortable with some of the theories that are being discussed. I would strongly recommend the purchase of Steve Kozak's guide, Preparing for PPA Certification. He calls it a CPP study guide because it will answer an awful lot of your questions, has great examples, and is an approved resource from the PPA. And if you don't mind, I'm sorry if I'm going a little long here, but Renee, you made a comment earlier where you said you really can't change the ambient, but yes, you can. And that's where shutter speed can make a major difference. So if you're outside and you want someone to look like it's darker, you would change your shutter speed. And you may want to take a look at high speed sync as an option.
Correct, but I was inside.
Well, either way, shutter speed will control the ambient light. Okay.
Right.
So right now your background looks kind of bright behind you, but if I change my shutter speed and use a flash just on your face, to what Skip said, expose for the room, light the face, I could light your room up at one level, but in changing the shutter speed, I could make it look like instead of a beige background, we could almost take that background out. Okay. So shutter speed is one of your, and by the way, nod, nod, wink, wink. Yes, that is on the exam.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Thanks for jumping in there, Guy. And who was going over the color? Who was that?
That was rerun.
Ron.
Oh, me? Oh, okay.
Did you? Who put up the colors?
Well, I'm not a color wheel expert. Okay, I'll start off with just saying
I
that.
thought you were.
No, not at all. I'm more the techie guy. But I mean, the easiest way I tend to think about this, I mean, and some of this is going to be just brute force memorization. But I remember RGB monitors, right? And when you think about the ink colors, they're CMY. And so as you think about equating those two, one is the colors in emittive scale, the other is the colors in the reflective scale. Okay, so red RGB, R would be equal to cyan, G would be equal to magenta, and B would be equal to yellow. Okay, and so think about those as you're thinking about as you go into and you start trying to control colors. In other words, taking down yellow will increase your blue. Okay, or in this, on the right hand side here, if you take down yellow on the subtractive scale, you're going to be forcing it to look more blue. Likewise, if you take down blue or cyan, you'll be making it look more yellow. So it's whichever one you take out will let the other one shine through. Let me make that go away. But
Yeah, no, the way that I've always looked at when I go to draw the color wheels, I draw the 3 overlapping circles that you have here. In the additive color wheel, the circles are the primary colors, red, green, and blue. In the subtractive one, it's where they overlap are the primary colors, the red, green, and blue. That's how I kept it straight.
I
And
think
then you
the other
still have
thing.
your secondary colors.
I think the other thing to mention about the difference between additive and subtractive colors is the very center of those graphs. Subtractive colors, when they're all combined, give you black. Additive colors, when they're all combined, give you clear or white.
Yeah, when you add all the colors together, you get white. When you subtract every bit of color, you end up with black.
oh, so on the CPP exam, if they give you a question and they tell you they create a curves layer, say, or a hue saturation layer, and they start taking they take down the cyan, what's that going to happen? What's that going to do to the picture? Well, if you take down the cyan, that's going to enhance the yellow. Okay, so that's the way they'd expect you to kind of understand the connection between the different colors in there. But I think Chris is right on. The lowest hanging fruit question they can ask you is, what is the presence of all colors look like in the subtractive scale, and that's black. The presence of all colors in the additive scale is white. That's the lowest hanging, easiest question to ask to probe if somebody understands that there's a difference between the two scales. So.
Rick, are we answering your question here, or is it muddying the waters for you?
No, that helped a lot. I guess my big question is the process for combining the colors the same? And it looks like the answer is yes. So.
Yeah, it's just the endpoint that's different.
Right.
And like I said,
and which are the primaries?
Now, I think, Mia, didn't you have a series of like a phrase you could do that would take you around the entire color wheel with all the different colors? Somebody did, or maybe that was Skip.
It must have been Skip.
Yeah. Is there? I thought you guys had something about that.
Yeah,
There is a mnemonic, but it's not politically correct. Do you mind?
Change it
I was
up.
gonna say it could be offensive to somebody, but
Yeah.
Really young girls can't buy Marlboros.
Okay, there you go.
or baked muffins.
There you go.
there you go, baked muffins. I like that.
Or can be mean.
Without parental consent. We'll add that at the end.
Wait a minute, don't get that in there. We'll get really confused. Wait a minute, what does that part mean?
Cool. Any other follow-up questions on color? All righty.
I just
There
found
was-
it easy. Is write out the color wheel before you start when your time starts. That way, when they ask you, oh, if you have a blue and a red, and what does that make? And you just follow the color wheel. It's very simple.
Yeah, I mean, right on the piece of paper they give you at the beginning and the end, so RGBCMY, and that way you've got the two in the emitted versus the subtractive color scales.
Right.
Okay.
One thing that Ron kind of touched on in the color wheel, and I wanted to touch on it more in general, low-hanging fruit on the test. Things to remember, for instance, for your exposure pairs or your exposure equivalents, you really don't need to memorize third stops on exposure equivalents. Low-hanging fruit on this test is going to be full stops. So if you memorize your f-stops and full stops, memorize your shutter speeds and full stops, you're going to be good. And I think a lot of times, and the only reason I bring it up right now is we've never mentioned it in this group. We've always kind of talked about, the concept, but we've never said, well, don't go as deep as memorizing third and half stops. The only time where third and half stops is going to come into play is in your image submission. So, but for the test, go with the low-hanging fruit. Go with the basics and with the foundation of what a shutter speed is and what an f-stop is and where the ISO full stops are.
Chris, I'd like to do a screen share on that topic. As you and I were chatting about this last night, myself being relatively newer to photography, when I came in, the cameras all had those third stops in them. And, many years back, I think maybe they didn't, if I am understanding correctly. Maybe I'm wrong. But what I found helpful was when I went to take the test, I memorized those full stops because it got muddy in my mind, which ones are actually the full stops. And then as I took my test, I jotted down just on a scrap paper in the margin somewhere, I wrote down those full stops. So when it came to the questions on equivalent exposures, I could just kind of count down my little timeline. So I found a visual last night that I would like to share because it may be helpful for some who, maybe need that visual. And this is it's called photographylife.com. At the top of the page, it looks like this. Somebody, maybe we could put that in the comments, but if you scroll down a ways, there is this nice little visual, and I'm all about the visuals. So you can see your full stops right along here, and then it's easy to just kind of hopscotch down the line as you're counting out your exposures for your f-stops. And then if you just click over, you've got the same for your shutter speeds, and then the same for your ISO. And I don't think you're going to need to go extreme like in this area on the exam. I think you're going to be in this area down here.
I think 1600 is the most that they go.
Okay.
On anything on the test.
This little tool here would, I don't know what that is. This little tool here would be good to look up. And if you don't off top of your head know what those full stops are, make yourself like a little flashcard or a little study guide to memorize those, so that when you get to those questions on equivalent exposure, you can more easily kind of count those down as you need to. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and James Martinez did a nice chart. I'm trying to find it. I thought I had it on my desktop.
Yeah, that chart that you just had up there is going to be really helpful as you start to plan out how to take your Sherman images.
Right.
Really helpful thing.
Okay, then, here's that website going into the chat for where I was just at. Cool.
Good deal.
Cool. So any other questions that are burning in your mind before we go off onto a different topic? I want to give you guys opportunity who have questions to take the lead before I fill time with something else.
Remember, you don't have to memorize those numbers. Everything is double, okay? Whether we're talking shutter speeds, we're talking apertures, I'll show you how to do that. When we're talking ISO, you start at 100 ISO, one stop is 200. The next stop is 400, and so forth. Same thing works with shutter speeds. Same thing works with apertures if you really want to think about it. You can throw that aperture chart up again real quick, Sarah.
Oh,
Maybe everybody knows this. I don't know, but everything is doubled in the aperture chart.
the aperture one is where I get like confused. But
Okay.
it's like the shutter speed and the ISO, like you said, are easy to double. Here, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute.
They're all doubled here too. Let me
Right.
show you something. Look all the way over on the left-hand side where it says 1.4, okay?
Mhm.
Put a 1 just to the left of that. So all you remember about apertures is 1 and 1.4, okay? Now you take that 1 and you double it, and what we got? We got 2, right? Then you take your 1.4 and you double it. What have you got? 2.8. Okay, now you go to the 2 and you double it. What's the next one? It's 4. Go to 2.8 and double it. It's 5.6.
Interesting. Okay.
Go to 4 and double it. It's F8. So forth, all the way across. Everything's doubled. In other words, you take the two numbers, 1 and 1.4, and you just keep doubling them all the way across, and you get your apertures.
Except for 11 is not 11.2.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We'll round that one off. You know, it happens to be that's the only one you have to round off.
Good thing you didn't get there, right?
But if you get to 11.2, that's going to be close enough.
I
Yeah.
probably failed those grade school questions where can you see the pattern and repeat the pattern? And
Yep.
I was
Well,
like, what?
That's the pattern for shutter speed, ISO, and ISO.
Yeah, I just remember the last decimal shutter speed is 5.6. It's whole numbers after that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Any
But
other questions?
2.8 doubled is 5.6.
Just a comment, you also have to round for shutter speed as well. So instead of doubling for 1/60th, it's 1/125th instead of 1/120th.
Yeah.
Close. Yep.
Good observation. Good point there.
But you know, it's all doubles in all of them basically. It's
Awesome.
Cool.
Good cop.
Plus, you know, their multiple choice are
Conversation.
going to give you so even if you take 1/60th and you double it, there's not going to be a 1/120th answer. The closest is going to be the 125.
Right.
Right, in a multiple choice scenario.
Yeah.
Cool.
Multiple guess.
All right. Rebecca, do you have any questions today? I see you hanging out there.
Just listening. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dogs. We just got a delivery and they're going bananas in the background. So, pardon any background noise.
So we got Deb and we got Cheryl here. They've both been on before. How's Deb coming in your process?
I am coming along good. Hello, everybody. I did have to push my exam out a little bit due to some family obligations, but I am still studying, and I'm out to mid-March now, and but I am still plugging along.
Good job.
Good job.
All righty. So what we'll do next then, I pulled a question from the practice test, which is the kind of thing that I use a lot as I shoot. And one of my primary areas is weddings. And what I find as I go from location to location on weddings or events is everywhere I go, the lighting is different, the color is different. And this comes into our Kelvin scale. So a lot of times on weddings, I shoot Kelvin as opposed to auto white balance or as opposed to custom white balance, because every time I turn around, the white balance is different. And to be constantly doing a different custom white balance, to me, it's just not feasible because I'm moving so much and it is constantly changing. So I tend to default to shooting on a Kelvin scale. And so learning and really getting a good, my head around the Kelvin scale is super helpful for me. And for those who may shoot in, fast-paced changing environments. So one of the questions.
You want me to share or you got it?
Yes, because I didn't screenshot the question.
There you go. So
the question of today then from the practice test is to achieve a white balance with a daylight balanced color temperature. what are you gonna set your white balance to on the Kelvin scale? Dun, dun.
Want to respond with chat? Is that how I'll do it?
They can, candidates, if you have a good feel for this, you can go ahead and discuss, and we'll help.
5,500.
That was Rick. Very good. Does everybody agree, or does anybody have a different guess? Or maybe you're not guessing. Maybe you're like, I know this. I got this. All right.
Come on, Deb. Come on, Deb. Come on, Deb. Come on, girl.
I don't know why I'm thinking. I know daylight is 6,500, right?
Is it?
On the
Not all scales give exactly the same numbers for each temperature, so watch out for that. You'll see on some scales they'll be a little bit different.
So maybe it's easier to talk about the other temperatures as well and say why they're not the correct answer, and help us to narrow down what the correct answer is. Go ahead, Deb. I know you're going to reach in there.
So I was shooting a little bit out in the snow when it wasn't windy. And I had to set my Kelvin to 65.
What time of day were you out?
Daytime, but heavy overcast, very flat light. Because of the snow and the clouds, everything was flat. You couldn't really see, the definition. So I bumped it up to 65, and it seemed pretty pleasing at that point.
Okay.
If that's a clue, Deb. Snow, sunshine filtering through these thick clouds. Sunny, it's bright.
Mia.
I'm trying to clue you. I can't kill you anymore.
right.
So I got Cheryl saying 5,500.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Lawrence
55.
is declared from North Carolina. He has said answer C, which is also 5,500.
55.
So it looks like consensus is saying that 5,500 is the answer to the question. But again, going back to the other answers in the question, so what does 3,200 degrees Kelvin represent? Or what kind of light does 3,200, would I set my camera to? Guy T's telling us that color temperature is on page 37 of Steve Kozak's book.
Cool. Good answers in the chat there, guys.
Yep, we got couple answers on tungsten.
Yeah. So what kind of environment would you be in if you walked into an environment? What would it look like?
Now remember, keep in mind, read the question. It's not talking at all about what environment you're in. I could be inside.
True. That's true.
The question
Right,
says,
but for sake of conversation, or of understanding when you might encounter those. Sorry, I'm cutting you off. Can you stop screen share so I can see people?
Sure.
Sorry. I don't know who I just cut off, and I'm trying not to do that.
That was Skip.
Sorry,
no,
go ahead.
I'm just saying, if you look at the question, I mean, it could be a very cloudy day, but the question says you want to shoot with daylight white balance. So it's more of a question of how your camera is set rather than how the environment is.
Right.
That particular question, you don't want to confuse yourself with some of these questions.
Right. You do have to take in consideration the wording of the question, but I was trying to walk through also the process of what each Kelvin temperature was in their answer, so we can do process of elimination on the question, which is a part of taking the test.
Right. So one of the things also to keep in mind is when you're talking about daylight, not necessarily as the Kelvin, but like you walk outside, a different time of day, the daylight color temperature can be different. For example, if I go out, right around sunset and the shadows are coming in, it's not going to be the same color temperature as at high noon or mid afternoon or mid morning. So if you lock onto like your high noon, your midday color temperature, as well as your flash strobes being in those 5,000s, if you kind of set that as your kind of like your middle C from the from your piano, and then you can skew one way or skew the other way for different scenarios, that might help. So we mentioned that 3,200, a couple people commented tungsten. So at what times or what scenarios might you skew off of that middle C or that middle daylight 5,000s to skew towards tungsten? What scenarios might you want to change your camera settings in that direction?
I think as the light is getting warmer, if you're trying to counteract, or if you're having to use tungsten, it's because you're counteracting a warmer light rather than a cooler light.
Right. Where might you do that? Say you've got your
in my living room is where I normally have to use tungsten.
Right, because
the
incandescent light bulbs that you find in houses and homes are naturally going to be that soft white, that soft light. And that can dip down into the 2000s. I think a lot of times those light bulbs that are soft white may be actually like 29 to 27K. So sometimes you may shoot like at a like 32, 3600K and then realize this is still really orange. You can drop your Kelvin, your white balance down into like 29, 27 sometimes to get a cleaner daylight look.
So, Steve Davis gave a good reference from Wikipedia on color temperature and kind of a general reference. That's in the chat. So if you guys wanted to kind of take a look at that,
excellent.
and
take a look at their graphics. I think you might enjoy it.
Yeah.
Right.
And then Guy T, I think, gave a reference to one of the books. Maybe not, because it was back a ways. Oh, there it is. Yeah. In Steve's guide, color temperatures on page 37.
Cool. So I want to also address, like, I think Mia was talking about shooting in the snow, and you were skewing more towards the 6,000 range. Is that right? So you'll notice this also in the evenings. You may be out around sunset, and you think, oh, sunset, the sky is orangey. It's gonna be more towards the 32Ks because we've got an orangier sky, which is true in the sky. But if you're photographing a person and they're it depends on where they're at. If they're catching that sunlight on their face, they're going to look very warm. But if they happen to be in the shadows, you'll notice as the sun goes down, the shadows are turning much more blue. And so when you're shooting out there and you're in shadow, those you got that shade, then you may want to skew towards those 6,000s because you're picking up a lot more blue, in the shadows. And so going that direction may balance it out in a more pleasing way for you as well. So can be a difference in time of day, whether you're skewing towards that 6,000 or even 7,000K versus midday full sun, which is going to be your true middle C daylight 5,000-ish range. Does that help a little bit? Or so? So one of the things that I find interesting, just kind of personal, is when I'm shooting at weddings, I know that my flash is is going to be like 55K, 58K, around there. It's going to be daylight. And be shooting in receptions where there's all this candlelight and all of the tungsten, the warm light. Or I'm indoors shooting, getting ready, and I've got window light plus overhead tungsten light plus flash, and trying to figure out, okay, what do I do now? So a lot of times indoors, when I've got mixed color, I will just set my color temperature to about 4,500, because it's not quite full daylight. I've got tungsten in there, but I'm not full tungsten. It's all mixed. So a lot of times about 45K is a good on the fly mixed color starting point, from which it's more easy to color correct later. That's free material. That's not on the test necessarily.
Do you just eyeball it? How do
I
you
do.
determine? Okay.
I do. When I'm on a wedding on the fly, if I'm shooting a controlled, take my time in the studio, then I'll be more precise with it because I'm controlling it much more. But when I'm shooting on the move and I don't have time to do that in every time I turn around. So I mean, if it's a vast difference, of where I'm going, I'll adjust, up or down on the Kelvin, but 4,500 usually for me is a really good starting point for most scenarios that I encounter through the day indoors.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have questions or comments on the Kelvin scale or scenarios? I've got another story to share, but I don't if you want to hear it, but I want to make sure that you guys are getting what you need.
We love stories. Go ahead.
Was that you, Steve?
Yeah, tell your story.
Okay.
Storytelling is always welcome
Okay.
for me. Okay.
So this was probably about 8 years ago. So I've been in photography about 10 years. So this was probably 8 or 9 years ago. I had just learned about white balance. Okay. And I'd just learned how to set a custom white balance. And I'd also been in conversations about should you shoot in RAW versus should you shoot in JPEG. So I come up to an event it was an athletic event, a gymnastics event that I was going to shoot. And I knew I was going to be shooting all day long and generating hundreds or thousands of pictures in a controlled environment in the gym. And so I thought, okay, I don't want huge files. If I set a custom white balance, I'll nail the color. And for the volume of pictures to conserve space, I can shoot JPEG if I shoot a custom white balance. So I got in this gym and I took a grid card and I shot a custom white balance on my grid card and I started shooting. And I noticed I would nail the color on a picture, and then I'd have a couple that skewed blue, a couple that looked yellow, a couple where half the picture was blue and half the picture was yellow. And then I'd get another one that was perfect. And then the whole cycle would repeat. And I was like, what in the world? So I thought I did something wrong. Let me shoot another custom white balance on the gray card. So I shot the gray card again. Same results. I'd nail 1 or 2 pictures. A couple would be blue, a couple would look yellow, and a few would be banded half blue, half yellow. And I thought, what in the world is going on? Some of you know exactly what happened. Ron, you're nodding. What did I not factor for?
Well, there's a couple of things I'm thinking. One of them, you were in bracket mode, is potentially one thing that could have driven that.
Except for the banded picture where half the picture was yellow and half the picture was blue. That would be I shouldn't get that in bracketing, right?
You would, no, you can still get that in bracketing.
Oh, really?
Only the flash would only be for part of it, and the rest of it would be ambient light. That's why it'd be part yellow, part correct.
Hopefully she wasn't using flash. The lights were fluorescent though, weren't they?
Correct. That was the problem. So the lights, and when you're in a gym situation, you may have all kinds of lights in there, and they may not be the same kinds of lights. If they're all fluorescent, there's a cycle in the color which we don't detect with our naked eye. But so what happened when I was taking a custom white balance with my gray card, it would lock in perfect color for 1 split second or portion of a second of that cycle. And then as I would take more pictures, those lights were cycling different, slightly different, what do you call it, I guess frequencies or whatever. So
Right.
you cannot be custom color and nail every picture when the lights are cycling through different color frequencies that you can't see. And then once I realized that, and then I thought, wow, I shot like 3,000 pictures on JPEG. Now, so I learned, don't ever shoot that on JPEG, and don't bother with a custom white balance in that environment, because it's not going to work for you.
The light bulbs are different ages too. Different
Correct.
age fluorescent bulbs are different colors.
Right. And
Sarah, what would you? Okay, question. How would you shoot that event today?
today, I
Yes.
would either go in, and I might even go on auto white balance. Oh, scandal.
That'll work.
But I think now,
There
the
you go.
way, like even from 8 to 10 years ago, the technology in our cameras, I think would handle that a lot better now than it did even at that time. Which that could be a processing nightmare later if it if it didn't work well. Or I would just have to go, okay, I know this is going to happen, shoot it custom, but shoot in raw, knowing I'm going to have a whole batch to then batch sort all the blues, all the yellows, and adjust them that way. Yes.
Hey, would you consider shooting in RAW plus JPEG to save time if the JPEGs happen to work out?
I wouldn't myself, but the next person
Too
might.
much space.
Okay, you would
No,
not.
the reason, Steve, the reason I don't do that is to save space, number one. But number two, the JPEG processor in most computer programs are a lot better than the JPEG processor that is in your camera. So I shoot everything raw and let Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw process the JPEG.
Okay, I think it depends on what kind of camera you have, perhaps.
Well, it also depends upon exposure too. Color aside, if your exposure needs to be adjusted, it's a lot easier to recover that exposure in RAW than it is in JPEG.
Well, yeah, we all know that. But
You know?
okay,
Yeah, I do both RAW and JPEG because, if I've got the exposure and everything right and the color balance right,
mhm,
I don't have to mess with it.
exactly. Thank you, Chuck. That's my thought exactly.
Yeah. Now,
Thank you.
when I'm shooting mainly my grandson's football games, I
Mhm.
shoot in JPEG only, auto white balance, and auto aperture because I'm on high speed shutter. The action is moving so quickly that, if you want your camera to be able to keep up with the action, you can't do RAW because it takes too long.
Right.
Absolutely.
I want to pick up on a common theme here from Chuck and Sarah is efficiency. So thank both of you for that. Thank you.
Right. And those are things that, in my opinion, there's not necessarily a right and wrong. There's a what works for you, it produces good results. And that can be different for different people based on how they work, what their camera limitations are. Like, I love, that Chuck, you're over here there on my screen. But, the benefit of JPEG is that, you don't have the buffer time, as bad a buffer time. You can just keep on shooting if you want that volume.
Mhm.
If you don't mind having that volume of pictures, and if you're nailing your color. But if you're indoors and you're not sure about the color and you want the flexibility and you can time your shots better so you don't have to
Yes.
have as many, then go raw,
There you go.
And I actually did some research looking for information and tips from guys who do nothing but sports photography. And they all agreed that when you're doing something fast moving like a football game or something like that, you want to shoot JPEG only because your camera won't keep up with the action doing RAW. I've tried it.
Yep, absolutely. That's all I do.
Experience as a teacher. Yeah.
Right.
Now, I do end up throwing away a lot of pictures.
Absolutely, that's what I do.
We had this conversation about those, Sarah, your conversation about the lights and the cycling between yellow and blue and all that. For anybody who's not taken the exam is not going to expect you to know about cycling of fluorescent lights and all that kind of stuff. That's way out of scope.
Right. Yeah.
So,
That's a good point, Ron. I was just thinking, we've kind of gotten out of the scope of the exam in our discussion. It's good conversation for, practical use. And I was thinking back to where this first became an apparent thing was back even in the days of film when I was shooting hockey, because of the cold arena and the sodium vapor lights. You could actually see back then we didn't call it banding, but what would end up to be banding in our prints, because we printed everything then, still. But that was where I learned about lights pulsing and, how that came about. So.
Right. Cheryl, I saw you had, you'd unmuted with the question a minute ago. Oh, you're mute.
Okay, I'm there. All right. I just wanted to make sure I understood Chuck, because I have grandkids who play outdoor sports. Auto white balance, JPEG, and auto ISO.
No.
Okay.
I did, it's auto ISO, auto white balance, and auto aperture. The only thing I control is my shutter speed, because I usually keep that at least 1/500th of a second, or usually 1/1000th of a second, because I want to freeze the action when them kids are moving. And depending on where they are on the field, the lighting is constantly changing. One end of the field might be darker than the other end of the field, and I don't have time to change it. So I let the computer inside the camera handle all that, and all I control is the shutter speed and trying to keep up with wherever the ball is, which I'm not that good at.
Thank you.
And that doesn't even hold true just for football. Basketball is also, some of these older gyms are terrible at having even lighting across the gym.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, basketball. Well, I don't do that many basketball games because my grandkids aren't into basketball, but football and baseball I'm always doing.
Those are good questions. And like Chris said, maybe, we stray, to an extent from the core content or the specific content of the exam. But on the other hand, there's value in knowing how it applies, because why are we getting the CPP? To better understand how to use the material. And sometimes these conversations give us an understanding in a way that helps us then think through the questions on the exam. If we know, well, I know this is true, or this happens this way, or this is my experience, then it can help you sometimes reason through some of those questions of the exam as well. So I hope it's helpful, the conversation, even though, like we said, we kind of, veered off different rabbit trails, but hopefully it'll help practically process some of the things a little bit better too. My train just derailed. I was thinking I was going to say something or ask something, and I'm like, boom, off the track there.
They're just getting some bonus knowledge from all your helpful CPP liaisons.
Okay, so in the chat here, Manuela asked a good question that is actually more in general about the exam. How long do you study usually until you're ready to take the exam? And I think Chuck's got an answer for that. I knew he would. And I think Skip's got an answer for that. And I've got an answer for that. And JR's got an answer for that. Mia's got an answer for that. And I guarantee you they're all going to be kind of a different answer. My answer, if I want to do it tongue in cheek, is 21 years. Because I was a working pro for 21 years, and that's what taught me the basics of this. But to be honest with you, I taught myself a lot of very incorrect terms. And when I went to take the test, I did take one of the one of the classes, and I was told, and very correctly, to take the back of the photography book by London and Upton and study the glossary. That's where the bad habits that I had learned, came into play. But and I did that to answer your question without being tongue in cheek. I studied the glossary, that part of it, for probably about 6 months, maybe not quite 6 months, before I did the class. I recommend very highly, taking some sort of guided class, unless you're really good about just being able to pick up a book and read and grasp a concept. Because a class will pick up on a concept that you may not have focused on enough that you can kind of then study afterwards. And I'll let any of the other liaisons in there who've taken the exam, kind of chime in there. Let's see here.
Mia's raising her hand.
Go for it, Mia.
Okay, so in the education business, what you want to know for yourself is what you don't know. And the only way to know that is just to take a practice test. 100 questions, just take the test. I know, Skip, you may not agree, but then you go, wow, I'm really good at this, but I'm kind of weak over here. You need to know where your strengths and deficits lie before you do that. And how long it takes you is how long it takes you. You could plug at it for 8 hours a day and maybe tackle things and understand things in 2 weeks, where another person only has an hour a week to dedicate because they have other responsibilities in life, and they do that and it takes them longer. So you don't know. There's no finger point gauge. It's going to take you this long. It's going to be that way. It's just not fair. No, look at what you don't know first. Take a test, just a practice test, go for it. Don't get discouraged. Just go, oh, this is, and think about what they're asking you, see what you know.
I don't know what you think I won't agree on. I would say exactly what Cheryl said in the chat. I'd take every practice test you can get your hands on until you can get between 85 and 90 on every one of them. You're not ready yet. And once you get them practice tests, I strongly advocate practice tests. Everyone you can get your hand on, And,
yeah, I did the same thing. I did the practice test and then found out what I didn't know and researched that more. And I kept taking those tests until I scored in the mid to upper 90s.
Right.
Then to what Chuck said. Oh, go ahead.
I took the test.
And then keep testing yourself after you pass.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep testing yourself and keep studying, because it's not over. You're just starting on this road.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the things I have a class on every Sunday night of the candidates in the state of Virginia. And one of the things you got to think about, we were talking about exposure equivalence and we were talking about color wheels and so forth. When you get ready to sit down and take a practice test, like that 50 question one, take you a blank sheet of paper. And when you sit down, write the stuff down on there, your exposure equivalence, your color wheel, whatever else you want to try and remember. And do that before you take the practice test. Then take the practice test using that piece of paper, because that's exactly what you can do when you can take the real test. Once you get through with your practice test, take that blank sheet of paper and throw it away, because you're going to start a new one the next time you take another practice test. And you'll get in the habit of doing exactly the way you're going to do it when you sit down to take the test.
Right. The other thing that I'd recommend, and I'll let you in here, recommend about practice tests is take different practice tests, because otherwise you're only memorizing the questions or the answers to the questions on the practice test that you're working from. So, and there's a number of different resources for practice tests. Guy's putting a lot of resources in here on or Guy T. I'm sorry, I keep calling you Guy. Guy T. Has been posting a lot of resources in here for practice tests. I think Steve Kozak has a wealth of practice tests. And then there is the one that's a 50 question test on that we're pulling our questions from on PPA website that's downloadable. So there's all kinds of different ways you can find practice questions.
And
I would caution that, and I know Guy T is a big proponent of this. I would caution, make sure that you're trying to use PPA approved material for the practice questions. There's also the Quizlet flashcards, and there's about 130 questions in the Quizlet flashcards. Those are good tools. So those are all good ways to kind of keep honing your questions for the test.
I want to interject here real quick too. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves for it, but there's no shame if you don't pass it. You can take it again. We have somebody in our own group who took it 7 times before she passed it, and it was really discouraging to her to feel like that failure, but it also gave her the grit of like, I will conquer this. And she didn't necessarily want to advertise how many times she didn't pass it herself, but she confided in me. But she just finally passed it very recently. And so to be able to journey together with people, and Manuela, you're in our group, you got support around you if you want to go for it. And anybody else too, seek out your peeps there that can support you, or any of us, and we're happy to help. So don't feel like a failure if you don't pass the first time. You just keep at it.
Yeah, you haven't
That's
failed
good,
until
Sarah, that you say that. I'm sorry. That's good that you say that, because that's kind of where I am. And I'm not discouraged, because when I started this journey, I haven't been a photographer for that long, but I started out wanting to know all of the ins and outs about photography. So however long it takes me to master this is my personal goal, is to become certified.
Good for
So,
you.
and
Good.
to be in a group like this is great support, because I didn't have this along the way. I just happened to stumble up on it. I think I saw Chris made a post here in Michigan, and I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that this even existed. So to have a group like this is very encouraging, even if I'm going on I think the 5th time. And
Yeah.
but I'm going to keep going until I pass it.
Yep.
The last time
That's
I failed by 6 points. I missed it by 6 points. But I like how you all saying just study. I mean, do the practice test until you get up to the 90s, because I think I was with some of the other people that was studying. It was like, I just want to get 70. I don't want to just get 70. I want to master it.
Good for
Right.
you.
Because that way I know the material. It's not just to say I passed it. I want to know the material. So
Good for
One
you.
thing
That's
I'd
really the
like
right
to
mindset to have too, Deb, because
Yep.
we all want you to know well enough that when you get in front of your first commercial client and they're expecting you to get the shot done first shot, then you're going to have the knowledge and the capability to go in there and succeed. That's our collective hope here, is that we can all help you get to that point.
One thing I'd like to put a shout out to Deb, because she has some tenacity to pass this CPP thing, but I also like to along the same line of what Sarah was saying, is this is not a statement on the CPP is not a statement on the quality of your work, your professional work as a photographer, because I'm in the same area and run in the same circles as Deb, and I've seen her work, and she as a professional work that she puts out as good a work as any other professional that I've seen out there. So just keep plugging at this, Deb, and I know you'll get the test knocked out, and then we'll work on your technical images. I think those will come easier to you than the test, maybe.
thank you, Chris.
Same goes for the image submission. I know the image submission is different now than it was when I took the exam. And at the time that I took the exam, I felt a tremendous amount of pressure to pass my images the first time, and that was pressure I put on myself. And it was just pride of like, I want to pass the first time. So, try to let the pressure off of yourself and realize you can do it again if you don't pass through, the first time. There was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of ego in the whole scenario with how the photos used to be and some of the feedback that was given. In fact, at one time I posted in a Facebook group on the CPP image submission, I sent a merited picture in just to see if it would get torn up, and it did. It got torn to shreds, and I was like, forget it. This is crazy.
Right. Yeah.
So I think how they've changed it now, the new image submission probably helps some of that angst in that process, but stick with it.
Well, and that was why they changed that process specifically, because it was a very subjective process in the past, and now it's a very technical process, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for ways to say this is where we all meet the standard of being a certified professional photographer. So I'm gonna real quick. We are in overtime, and I'm gonna stay online here, and several of us will stay online here. And if you have more questions, but I understand if you have to go, we'll close it out here. In the chat, at the bottom of the chat, right above where you type your chat in, there's a box with 3 dots. If you go to that box, there's it's a menu. There's a save chat. You can save the chat to your computer. It puts it in a file on your computer, and you can see there's a wealth of information there in the chat. I think it'd be wise for you guys to do that. Guy T has put a lot of good references in there to some PPA approved material. I would go ahead and check those out. So we'll hang out here for the overtime. Anybody who would like to join us for that, if you can't, I understand. Some others of us have to get out and shovel a driveway, which is not cool.